Blind since birth, a millionaire lives trapped in his own darkness until the silent touch of a poor girl turns his reality upside down. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway of Clear Horizon Foundation like a calculated symphony. Thomas Reed walked with the precision of someone who had transformed darkness into an ally, his fingers sliding lightly along the wall while absorbing every sonic detail of the environment. Nervousness hung in the air like cheap perfume. Staff whispered last-minute instructions. Chairs were hastily dragged across floors, and the smell of fresh paint betrayed the rush to disguise the imperfections of the place. "Mr. Reed, we're approaching the main courtyard," murmured Karen, his personal assistant for more than a decade. Her voice carried that rehearsed formality he knew well, but today there was something different, a tension she was trying to mask. "The children are in free activity, as you requested." Thomas nodded, adjusting the tactile watch on his wrist. 52 years of life had taught him that numbers never lied, unlike people. His company controlled 17 hotels scattered throughout the Northeast, generated jobs for more than 3,000 employees, and moved figures few dared to dream of. But here, in this social project that bore his surname, he felt strangely displaced. The courtyard opened before him like a universe of sounds. Children's laughter mixed with the creaking of swings, barefoot steps ran across concrete, and conversations, in low tones, formed a chaotic but familiar melody. Thomas breathed deeply, allowing his other senses to map the space. The smell of school lunch lingered in the air, mixed with the aroma of tempera paint and construction paper. It was a world he financed, but rarely visited. "Dr. Mitchell is approaching," informed Karen, and Thomas could hear the neuroscientist's firm footsteps before his voice echoed across the courtyard. "Thomas, good to have you here." Dr. Mitchell Evans' voice sounded genuinely warm. "The children are excited about your visit, although some don't exactly know who you are." Thomas smiled for the first time that morning. Mitchell was one of the few people who didn't need to filter words in his presence. With a doctorate in neuroscience from Boston University, specializing in child behavior, Mitchell had been the obvious choice to coordinate the Foundation's experimental program. His scientific approach perfectly balanced with a rare sensitivity for dealing with children who didn't fit conventional patterns. "Tell me about the project," Thomas asked as they walked slowly through the courtyard. "The reports are too technical. I want to understand what really happens here." Mitchell hesitated for a moment. "We're working with children who exhibit what we call sensitive intelligence. These are young people who demonstrate heightened perceptions, often misunderstood by traditional schools. Some have episodes that teachers classify as inattention, but which actually reveal a differentiated ability to process information." "And does it work?" Thomas stopped walking, turning his face in the direction of Mitchell's voice. "More than we expected. We have a girl, for example, who came here labeled as problematic. Emma, 11 years old, frequent crises at school, family in a vulnerable situation. But when we began working with her," Mitchell made a significant pause. "Thomas, this child draws places she's never visited with photographic precision. She describes sensations and scenarios that go beyond common imagination." Thomas furrowed his brow. In his 52 years, he had learned to distrust explanations that escaped business logic. Numbers, strategies, measurable results, that was his universe. But something in Mitchell's voice aroused his curiosity. "Where is she now?" "Probably in her little corner, near the apple tree. Emma has her own rituals, her moments of isolation that we respect. She's a special child, Thomas, very special." They walked toward the back of the courtyard, where the sound of other children became more distant. Thomas could feel the change. In the texture of the air, the proximity of plants, and the shade of a large tree. His steps naturally slowed, and he realized it wasn't just spatial orientation guiding him, but something more subtle, almost instinctive. That's when it happened. Without warning, without words, a small, warm hand touched his. It wasn't a handshake or a rehearsed gesture. It was simply a touch, delicate yet firm, as if those little fingers knew exactly where they should land. Thomas completely froze. The world around him, the sounds of the courtyard, Karen's distant voice, Mitchell's worried murmur, everything vanished into a single sensation. The touch was warm, soft, but charged with something indefinable. An electric current ran up his arm, rose through his chest, and lodged somewhere near his heart. There was no pressure, no urgency. The hand simply remained there, as if it were the most natural place in the world to be. Thomas felt his heart accelerate, but not from nervousness. It was something different, a disconcerting familiarity, as if that touch carried memories he couldn't consciously access. For a few seconds, or perhaps minutes, he lost track of time, Thomas remained motionless. His breathing became deeper, and a strange sensation of peace spread throughout his body. It was as if that small hand had found exactly what it was looking for. Then, as silently as it had arrived, the hand withdrew. Thomas remained standing, his arm still extended to where the touch had occurred. His other senses, usually so sharp, seemed numbed. He could hear Mitchell whispering something to Karen, footsteps cautiously approaching, but none of that mattered. His mind was completely focused on the residual sensation of that contact. "Thomas," Mitchell's voice sounded distant, although he was quite close. "Are you okay?" Slowly, Thomas lowered his arm and turned in the direction of the voice. His expression had completely changed. The usual rigidity of his features had given way to something softer, more vulnerable. "Who was that?" he asked, and his own voice sounded different to himself. "Emma," Mitchell answered carefully. "The girl I was telling you about. She does that sometimes, approaches people without warning. But she had never." "Had never? What?" Mitchell exchanged a significant look with Karen before responding. "Had never approached an unfamiliar adult that way. Emma is extremely selective with physical contact. In fact, she usually completely avoids touching people she doesn't know." Thomas nodded slowly, but his mind was elsewhere. That touch had awakened something inside him, a restlessness he couldn't name. It was as if a door that had remained closed for decades had been cracked open, letting fragments of something forgotten escape. "I need to go," he finally said, turning toward the exit. His steps were less certain now, as if the mathematical precision that normally guided his movements had been replaced by something more instinctive and unpredictable. Karen accompanied him in silence to the car, respecting her boss's clearly introspective mood. During the entire journey back to the penthouse, Thomas remained quiet, his right hand unconsciously caressing the spot where he had felt Emma's touch. That night, for the first time in years, Thomas couldn't concentrate on spreadsheets or reports. Sitting in his Italian leather armchair, facing the window that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean in Cape Cod, he found himself repeatedly touching the same spot on his hand, trying to recreate the sensation of that afternoon. The sound of the waves, which normally calmed him, today seemed charged with a message he couldn't decipher. And when he finally fell asleep, well into the early morning, Thomas dreamed of an unknown beach, with the sound of children's laughter, and the inexplicable feeling that something very important was just beginning. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The dreams came like uncontrollable waves. Thomas woke the following morning with his heart racing and his hands trembling, carrying with him images so vivid they seemed like real memories. A white sand beach stretched infinitely in his mind. The rhythmic sound of waves mingled with the crystalline laughter of a child. But the most disturbing was the absolute certainty that he knew that place, although he could never have seen it. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Thomas ran his hands over his face, trying to shake off the sense of déjà vu that dominated him. In 5 decades of life, his dreams had always been abstract, composed of sounds, textures, and sensations. Never images. But now, for the first time, his mind was creating visual scenarios with frightening clarity. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," Karen greeted when he entered the living room. Her voice carried a veiled concern. "You look pale today. Did you sleep poorly?" Thomas hesitated before answering. How could he explain that he had dreamed of colors he didn't know, of landscapes his blindness made impossible? How could he describe the sensation of being simultaneously lost and at home in a place that existed only in his mind? "Just some nightmares," he muttered, heading for his usual armchair. Karen, I need you to schedule an appointment with Dr. Mitchell, today if possible. Any specific problem? She asked, already noting in her electronic calendar. Thomas unconsciously touched the spot on his hand where he had felt Emma's touch. The sensation was still there, like an invisible mark that refused to disappear. I need to understand some things about the Foundation's project, about that girl. Meanwhile, 18 miles away, Emma was waking with a strange sense of peace. Rose, her mother, found her sitting on the bed, drawing. In her crumpled notebook with unusual concentration, the drawing showed a tall man in a dark suit, extending his hand to a small girl. In the background, a beach stretched as far as the eye could see. "Emma, honey, did you dream about this?" Rose asked, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. The girl raised her clear eyes, which seemed to carry wisdom beyond her 11 years. "I didn't dream, Mum, I remembered." Rose felt a shiver run down her spine. Since she was little, Emma had these disconcerting phrases, these certainties that made no logical sense. At 3, she had described in detail the house where Rose had grown up, though she had never been there. At 7, she drew the face of the grandfather who had passed before Emma was born, with a precision that left the entire family speechless. "Remembered what, my love?" Emma turned her attention back to the drawing, adding shadows to the man's face with a technique she hadn't learned anywhere. "The man who came yesterday. I already knew him from before." "From before when?" "From long before," Emma answered simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He was lost and I needed to show him where we were." Rose observed her daughter in silence. She had learned not to question these mysterious declarations from Emma too much. The neighbors already whispered strange stories about the girl, and Rose feared that excessive questioning could worsen the episodes that already worried the school so much. At Clear Horizon Foundation, Mitchell Evans arrived earlier than usual. The scene from the previous day had been etched in his mind like a scientific puzzle that needed deciphering. In 15 years studying child behavior, he had never witnessed such an immediate and inexplicable connection between two people who had just met. Claire. He called upon spotting the young volunteer organizing teaching materials in the courtyard. The 17-year-old girl turned, her curly hair dancing in the wind. Claire was a special presence at the foundation, exemplary student, dedicated volunteer, and possessor of a rare sensitivity for dealing with the most difficult children. "Good morning. Dr. Mitchell, you're worried," she observed. Walking in his direction, Mitchell smiled. Claire had this disconcerting ability to read people like open books. It was a characteristic that had initially made him question his scientific methods, but that he now considered a valuable tool for understanding the Foundation's children. "I need to talk to you about Emma. Did you notice anything different yesterday during Mr. Reed's visit?" Claire nodded slowly. Emma was agitated from early on, quieter than normal, but it was a charged quietness, as if she were waiting for something. Waiting? "She drew all morning, Dr. Mitchell. Always the same drawing, a man in a suit approaching her. When I asked who it was, she said it was the man who lost his light." Mitchell frowned. "She said that before the visit?" "Hours before. And when Mr. Reed arrived, I saw her get up as if someone had called her. She went straight to him without hesitation. The two were interrupted by the arrival of Thomas, accompanied by Karen. The businessman seemed different today, less rigid, but also more restless. His steps, normally sure and calculated, had a more exploratory quality. "Mitchell," Thomas greeted, "thank you for receiving me on such short notice." "Think nothing of it, Thomas. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about yesterday, too." Mitchell paused. "How did you feel after the encounter with Emma?" Thomas hesitated. He was a man accustomed to maintaining control over his words, his feelings, his reactions. But something about that direct question disarmed his usual defenses. "Confused," he finally admitted. "I had dreams and visions, things I've never experienced before." Claire discreetly approached, her eyes shining with genuine interest. "Mr. Reed, may I ask a question? Have you ever had spiritual experiences?" Thomas turned his face in the direction of the young voice. "Spiritual. Sensations you can't explain rationally. Very strong intuitions. Dreams that seem like memories." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Thomas, a man of reason and numbers, found himself confronted with concepts he had spent his entire life avoiding. But the sincerity in the young woman's voice combined with the restlessness he had felt since the previous day, made him lower his defenses. "Yes," he said simply. "Especially after yesterday." Claire exchanged a significant look with Mitchell. "Mr. Reed, in the community I attend, we believe certain people are born with a special sensitivity. Emma is one of them. And from what I'm perceiving, you might be one too, Claire," Mitchell murmured in an attempt to interrupt. "No, Mitchell. He needs to know." Claire turned back to Thomas. "Emma isn't just a child with attention problems. She has what we call mediumship. She sees things others don't see, feels presences, has connections that surpass what we consider normal." Thomas remained silent, processing the words. Part of him, the business part logical, wanted to reject all that as superstition. But another part, one that had awakened with Emma's touch, recognized truth in those words. "And yesterday," Claire continued softly, "when she touched your hand, you recognized each other. Not consciously, perhaps, but your souls remembered." "Remembered what?" "A previous connection. A story that unites you beyond this life." Thomas felt his legs weaken. He sat heavily in a nearby chair, his mind spinning with possibilities that defied everything he believed in. It was at that moment that Emma appeared in the courtyard, carrying her drawing notebook. She walked directly to where they were, her steps small but determined. Without saying a word, she opened the notebook to a specific page and placed it in Thomas's hands. "Can you see now?" she asked in her sweet voice. Thomas ran his fingers over the paper, feeling the pencil marks, the contours of the drawings, and then something impossible happened. In his mind, the lines began to form images. The beach from his dreams took shape. The man in the suit became clear. The girl at his side smiled with a disconcerting familiarity. "How?" he whispered. Emma held his hand again, and this time Thomas felt not only peace, but also a torrent of emotions that weren't his own. Longing, joy, an overwhelming feeling of reunion. "You were lost in darkness for a long time," she said simply. "I came to get you." Mitchell observed the scene with scientific and personal fascination. Claire smiled, as if witnessing something she had long expected. And Thomas, the man who had built an empire based on logic and calculations, found himself confronted with a reality that defied everything he knew about himself and about the world. The discovery came by chance, as the most disturbing revelations often do. Mitchell was in his office at the Foundation, browsing the internet in search of material for research on genetic memory, when he came across a digital archive from the Museum of European Immigration. It was a collection of old photographs donated by families who had emigrated to America in the early 20th century. He was looking for scientific references, but ended up getting lost among the historical images, fascinated by the wealth of details they preserved. That's when his heart almost stopped. On the screen, in faded black and white, was a photograph dated 1920. An elegant man, in a dark suit and erect posture, held the hand of a small girl. They were standing in front of what appeared to be a large colonial house with palm trees in the background. The man had features identical to Thomas's, the same face shape, the same jawline, the same deep eyes. The girl, in turn, was a perfect copy of Emma, from her straight hair to the serene and wise expression that defied her apparent age. Mitchell enlarged the image, analyzed each detail, trying to find some logical explanation. Genetic coincidence, perhaps, casual resemblance. But the more he observed, the more evident the impossibility of such a coincidence became. "Claire!" he shouted, and the young woman appeared running at his office door. "What is it, Dr. Mitchell? You're pale." Mitchell turned the monitor toward her. "Look at this photograph. Tell me what you see." Claire approached, and her eyes progressively widened. "My God! It's them. It's Thomas and Emma." "It's impossible, Claire. This photo is from 1920, 100 years ago." Claire studied the image carefully, her spiritual knowledge offering a different perspective from traditional science. "Dr. Mitchell, in spiritualist doctrine, we believe in reincarnation, in the continuity of the soul through different existences. If Thomas and Emma really have a past life connection, are you suggesting they were together 100 years ago? I'm suggesting that perhaps some connections are too strong to be broken by temporal passage." Mitchell saved the image and began researching information about it. The file indicated that the photo belonged to the Reed Sanford family, European immigrants who settled in Massachusetts in the early 20th century. The man was identified as Thomas Reed Sanford, a prosperous merchant, and the girl as Olivia Sanford Reed, his adopted daughter. "Claire, look at this," Mitchell pointed to the information. "Thomas Reed Sanford, the surname is the same. And Olivia, it's almost Emma." The two looked at each other, the magnitude of the discovery beginning to form in their minds. If that were true, if there really existed a connection between past and present, then everything they had witnessed in recent days took on a completely new dimension. Meanwhile, Thomas was going through his own journey of discovery. He had spent the morning in his personal library, sifting through family documents he normally ignored. Karen found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by dusty boxes and yellowed papers. "Mr. Reed, what are you looking for?" "Information about my family, about the Reeds who came before me." Thomas was holding an old document between his fingers, trying to extract information through touch. "Karen, I need you to read this to me. It's my grandfather's birth certificate." Karen carefully took the paper. "Thomas Reed Sanford, born in 1890 in England, emigrated to America in 1915. Thomas breathed deeply. "And is there mention of children?" "Let me see, yes. One biological son, Anthony, born in 1918, and an adopted daughter, Olivia Sanford Reed, born in 1910. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle fitting together in his mind. The name Olivia echoed with a disconcerting familiarity, like a forgotten song that suddenly comes back to memory. "Karen, I need you to schedule a meeting with Dr. Mitchell, today, and ask him to bring all the records he can get about Emma's activities since she arrived at the foundation." That afternoon, the four met in Mitchell's office: Thomas, Karen, Mitchell, and Claire. The tension in the air was palpable as Mitchell prepared his presentation. "Thomas, before showing what we discovered, I need you to be prepared. What I'm going to present defies any conventional scientific explanation." Thomas nodded, his posture erect, but his slightly trembling hands revealing his anxiety. Mitchell turned on the projector, and the 1920 photograph appeared on the wall. Karen let out a muffled cry, covering her mouth with her hands. "Mr. Reed." "This man," she whispered. "Describe the image to me," Thomas asked, his voice controlled but tense. Karen took a deep breath before answering. "It's a man who looks exactly like you. Same height, same posture, same face shape. He's holding the hand of a girl who is identical to Emma. They are standing in front of a large house with palm trees." Thomas remained silent for long minutes, processing the information. "And the dates?" 1920, Mitchell answered. "And there's more, Thomas. The man in the photo is named Thomas Reed Sanford, your great-grandfather. The girl is Olivia Sanford Reed, his adopted daughter." "Olivia," Thomas repeated slowly. "Emma." Claire stood up and approached him. "Mr. Thomas, may I place the photograph in your hands? Sometimes touch reveals things that vision cannot capture." Thomas nodded, and Claire carefully placed a printed copy of the photo between his fingers. Immediately his hands began to tremble. A wave of emotions hit him like a tsunami. Paternal love, protection, a deep and inexplicable connection with the girl in the photo. "I loved her," he whispered, and everyone in the room understood that he wasn't talking about Emma, but about Olivia. She was everything to me." Tears began to stream down Thomas's face, and for the first time in decades he didn't try to contain them. Memories that weren't his own began to surface in his mind. A large house in Boston, the smell of coffee in the morning, small steps running down wooden corridors, a childish voice calling him Papa Thomas. "What happened to them?" he asked, still holding the photograph. Mitchell consulted his notes. According to the records, Thomas Reed Sanford was very successful in business, established a prosperous hospitality company. But in 1925, there are records that Olivia became seriously ill. The documents are vague, but apparently she passed away. Very young, Thomas sobbed. The pain he felt was real, visceral, as if he had lost Olivia yesterday and not almost 100 years ago. "And what does this mean now?" Karen asked, her voice careful. Claire sat down next to Thomas. "It means that souls have their own memory. It means that true love transcends time and physical form. Thomas, you and Emma have met again because there is an unfulfilled promise, a connection that the passage of time couldn't break." But how is it possible? How can I have memories of a life I didn't live? Because the memories aren't in your current brain, Claire explained gently. They're in your soul. And Emma's touch awakened those dormant memories. Mitchell, even with all his scientific training, couldn't refute the emotional logic of what he was witnessing. Thomas, in the last few days I've observed changes in you. Your body posture, your tone of voice, even your way of walking. It's as if you were becoming a more complete version of yourself. And Emma? Thomas asked. Emma always knew, Claire replied. Children like her maintain the connection with other dimensions longer. That's why the drawings. That's why the certainty with which she approached you. She recognized you immediately. Thomas rose slowly, still holding the photograph. I need to see her. I need to talk to her. She's in the courtyard, Mitchell informed. Since you arrived, she has been drawing non-stop. Always the same image, the two of you walking together toward the sea. When Thomas reached the courtyard, Emma raised her eyes from her notebook and smiled. It was a different smile from what he had seen in other children, loaded with ancient wisdom and unconditional love. You remembered, she said simply. Thomas knelt beside her, and for the second time in his adult life, he allowed the tears to flow freely. I missed you, little one. All these years I missed you without knowing why. Emma held his face with her small hands. I promised I would come back to you. Soul promises are stronger than the passage of time. And in that moment, under the blue sky of Massachusetts, two souls met again after decades of unconscious searching, ready to write a new chapter of a story that time had interrupted, but never managed to completely erase. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Rose Miller arrived home that afternoon with a heavy heart. Work at the Henderson family house had been especially exhausting, but it wasn't the physical fatigue that bothered her. It was the constant worry about Emma, who in recent days seemed to be living between two worlds, the present and somewhere Rose couldn't understand. She found her daughter sitting in the small backyard, drawing as always, but this time there was something different about her posture. Emma seemed more serene, more centered, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Hi, my love, Rose greeted, sitting next to her daughter in the worn plastic chair. How was your day at the foundation? Emma raised her eyes and Rose felt her heart tighten. There was a different light in the girl's gaze, a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone only 11 years old. Mom, the man remembered, Emma said simply. Remembered what, honey? Me, from when we were a family, Rose sighed. Since she was little, Emma had these disconcerting declarations, but lately they had become more frequent and specific. It was as if the girl lived simultaneously in the present and in some distant past. Emma, do you want to tell me what's happening? For real? The girl closed her drawing notebook and turned completely to her mother. Mom, do you believe that people can meet again, even after being separated for a very long time? Rose studied her daughter's serious face. Are you talking about people who knew each other and lost touch? No, Mom, I'm talking about people who loved each other and were separated by circumstances they couldn't control. The depth of the question left Rose speechless. How could an 11-year-old child formulate such complex thoughts about separation and reunion? Honey, where do these ideas come from? Emma got up and ran inside the house, returning with an old cardboard box that Rose recognized as belonging to her deceased grandmother. Mom, can you read this to me? Rose opened the box, intrigued. Inside were yellowed letters, old photographs, and documents she had never examined in detail. Emma pulled out a specific envelope and handed it to her mother. This letter, Grandma left it for when I became special. Special how? Like I am now? Rose carefully opened the envelope, finding a letter written in the shaky handwriting she recognized as her grandmother's. She began to read aloud. My dear Rose, if you are reading this letter, it means the special girl has arrived in our family. I always knew she would come, because it was promised in dreams that a child would be born with the gift of seeing beyond the veil that separates this world from the other. Rose stopped reading, looking at Emma with astonishment. Grandma Martha wrote this about you. Emma calmly nodded. Keep reading, Mom. Rose returned to the letter. This child will have episodes that others will call illness, but which are actually visits to other dimensions. She will draw places she has never seen, will know people before meeting them, and one day, when the time is right, she will touch the one who lives in the shadow of reason, so that he may see with what he has inside. Rose's hands trembled. Emma, how could your grandmother know? Because some things are prepared long before they happen, Emma answered with the simplicity of someone stating obvious truths. The letter continued. When this meeting happens, don't be afraid. The girl isn't sick nor lost. She is fulfilling a mission that their souls agreed upon before returning to this world. Love her, protect her, but don't try to prevent what must happen. Rose folded the letter, tears streaming down her face. All her life she had tried to protect Emma from the curious looks of neighbors, the insistent questions from teachers, the medical diagnoses that never seemed to completely explain what was happening with her daughter. And now she discovered that her own grandmother had foreseen all this. Mom, Emma held her hand, you don't need to worry about me anymore. I found who I came for. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Thomas was undergoing the deepest transformation of his adult life. He had requested a temporary leave from his business functions, and for the first time in decades, was dedicating his days to something that didn't involve spreadsheets or business meetings. Karen found him every morning in unusual positions, sitting on the library floor, going through boxes of old objects, or on the balcony, simply listening to the sounds of the city with an almost meditative attention. Mr. Reed, she said that morning, you have an important phone call. The director of the Miami hotel needs a decision on the expansion. Thomas, who was examining an old toy, a small wooden horse that had belonged to his childhood, raised his face in Karen's direction. Tell the director I trust his judgment. He has the authority to make all operational decisions for the next few months. Karen blinked, surprised. Thomas had never delegated important responsibilities without detailed personal supervision. Sir, are you sure? It's a $6 million investment. I'm sure, Thomas replied, turning his attention back to the wooden horse. Karen, would you happen to know where this toy came from? She approached. I believe it's from when you were a child. It was in the box of belongings that came from your mother's house. Thomas carefully ran his fingers over the worn wood. And then it happened again, that sensation of recognition, of ancestral memory. In his mind, images formed of a small girl playing with that same little horse, her laughter echoing through the corridors of a large house. Karen, I need to go to the foundation, now. When Thomas arrived at Clear Horizon Foundation, he was greeted by Mitchell, who seemed eager to share new discoveries. Thomas, I got more information about your great-grandfather and Olivia, and there's something you need to know. They headed to Mitchell's office, where Claire was already waiting with new documents spread across the desk. What did you discover? Thomas asked. Mitchell took a deep breath. Olivia wasn't just Thomas Reed Sanford's adopted daughter. According to records I found in the archive of St. John's Church, she had been found orphaned on the streets of Boston when she was only 3 years old. Your great-grandfather took her in and raised her as his daughter, and she became ill, Thomas asked, his voice laden with emotion. Claire gently intervened. Thomas, the medical records of the time are vague, but there are indications that Olivia had episodes that doctors couldn't explain. Sudden fainting, periods when she seemed absent, drawings of places she had never visited. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. Like Emma. Exactly like Emma, Claire confirmed. And there's more. We found a personal letter from your great-grandfather, written a few days before Olivia passed away. In it, he describes how the girl had completely changed his life, how she had come to teach him to see with his heart. Mitchell placed a copy of the letter in Thomas's hands. He wrote, Olivia brought light to my inner darkness. Before her I lived only for business, for material success. She showed me that there are forms of wealth that the eyes cannot see, but that the soul immediately recognizes. Thomas trembled upon hearing his own transformations, described by someone who had lived 100 years before. And what happened after she passed away? Your great-grandfather never fully recovered, Mitchell continued. He dedicated the rest of his life to charitable works, especially aimed at orphaned children. It was as if he spent the rest of his days somehow looking for her. Like me, Thomas whispered. All my life I felt there was something missing, someone I was looking for without knowing who it was. Claire approached him. Thomas, I believe there are even more layers to this story. Emma didn't appear in your life by chance. You have a connection that transcends this existence, and there's something you need to complete together. Complete what? This, Claire said, pointing to the wooden horse that Thomas was still holding, might be a clue. Objects carry memories, especially when they've been touched with love for a long time. Thomas held the toy more tightly, and again the images surfaced in his mind. This time, however, they were clearer. He saw Olivia running through the garden of a large house, the little horse in her hands, her voice calling him to play. And he felt the promise he had made to her, that he would always take care of her no matter what happened. She came back so I could fulfill my promise, he said, tears streaming down his face. She came back so I could protect her as I couldn't do in the previous life. It was at that moment that Emma entered the office, walking directly to Thomas. Without saying a word, she placed her hands over his, which were still holding the wooden horse. You remembered our game, she said sweetly. Thomas nodded, unable to speak through the emotion that dominated him. Now you can teach me to play again, Emma continued. But this time we won't be separated. And in that instant, everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing something much greater than a coincidence or even a common spiritual connection. They were seeing two souls fulfilling a commitment made beyond time, beyond reason, in a dimension where true love knows no limits or boundaries. Emma's disappearance happened on a rainy Tuesday in March. Rose arrived at the foundation at the usual time to pick up her daughter, but was greeted by Mitchell with a worried expression that made her heart race. Rose, when was the last time you saw Emma today? This morning, when I left her here. Why? Where is she? Mitchell led her to his office, where Claire was waiting with eyes red from worry. Emma disappeared during the afternoon. No one saw her leave, but when we went to look for her for snack time, she simply wasn't here anymore. Rose felt her legs weaken. Did you look everywhere? In the bathrooms, in the kitchen, in the storage room? We searched the entire foundation, Rose. And there's something else, Claire hesitated before continuing. Before disappearing, Emma gave this to me. Claire handed a drawing to Rose. The image showed Thomas and Emma walking hand in hand toward the sea, but this time there was something different. Behind them, transparent figures accompanied them, a man and a girl who clearly represented Thomas Reed Sanford and Olivia from the past. She said it was time to show him the way, Claire explained. That there was something he needed to see to fully understand his mission. Rose studied the drawing, noticing details that her daughter had never included before. In the background of the image, there was a building that looked like a hotel or inn, and people working happily around it. Where do you think she went? We have a theory, Mitchell intervened. Yesterday, when Thomas was here, he mentioned that he was having recurring dreams about a specific beach. Always the same beach, always with Emma by his side. Claire believes that Emma went to show him where that beach really exists, Rose completed, with the mother's intuition that deeply knew her daughter's mysteries. Meanwhile, Thomas was going through the most transformative experience of his life. He had awakened that morning with the urgent sensation that something was about to happen, something that would definitively change the course of his existence. He was in his library when he felt a familiar presence. He turned, and there was Emma standing at the door as if it were the most natural thing in the world. How did you get in here? He asked, but his voice carried no surprise, only a serene acceptance of the impossible. I came to get you, she answered simply. It's time for you to see. See what? The place where our story began, and where it will begin again. Emma approached and held his hand. Immediately, Thomas felt a transformation in his perception. It was as if invisible veils were being removed from his senses. Not that he could see with his eyes, but something inside him was awakening to a different form of vision. Come, Emma said, guiding him toward the exit. Thomas followed without questioning, completely trusting this girl who had revolutionized his existence. They walked to the elevator, descended to the garage, and somehow he knew exactly which car to take and where to drive. During the entire journey through the city, Thomas drove the vehicle with an impossible confidence for someone who had never seen. It was as if his hands knew every curve, every traffic light, every detail of the way. Emma remained silent by his side, radiating a peace that completely tranquilized him. 40 minutes later, they arrived at a beach on the northern coast of Massachusetts. Thomas stopped the car and remained seated for a moment, absorbing the familiar sounds of the waves, the smell of salt in the air. the warm breeze caressing his face. "I know this place," he said, more to himself than to Emma. "You brought Olivia here many times," she confirmed. "It was your favorite place." Thomas got out of the car and walked toward the beach, guided by a memory that wasn't his, but that he felt as his own. His bare feet touched the warm sand, and waves of recognition hit him like emotional tides. "This is where you promised her you would always be her protector," Emma said, walking beside him. "And this is where I failed her," Thomas whispered, the tears beginning to flow. "You didn't fail. True love never fails, it only transforms. You were separated by time, but the promise remained alive in both your souls." Thomas knelt in the sand, touching it with his hands as if blessing a sacred place. "What should I do now, Emma? How can I fulfill the promise I made 100 years ago?" Emma sat beside him, her small hand finding his. "The promise wasn't just to protect Olivia. It was to use the love you shared to transform the world around you." Thomas Reed Sanford never managed to complete his mission because the pain of separation paralyzed him. "And what is my mission now? The same it always was. To use your prosperity and influence to care for children like me. Special children who are misunderstood, rejected, unnecessarily medicated. To create a place where they can develop their gifts without fear." Thomas felt an absolute clarity forming in his mind. It was as if all the pieces of his life, his blindness, which had made him more sensitive to other forms of perception, his wealth, which gave him the power to create real change, his emotional isolation, which had prepared him to accept transcendental connections, finally fit together in a greater purpose. "A place where children like you can be understood and valued," he murmured. "Exactly. And where other children can learn that there are different ways of seeing the world. A place where mediumship isn't seen as illness, where sensitivity isn't seen as weakness." Thomas stood up, feeling more whole than he had ever felt. "We'll transform Clear Horizon Foundation into this. We'll create the first development center for children with special abilities in the Northeast." Emma smiled. And in that smile, Thomas saw not just the 11-year-old girl who stood before him, but also Olivia from 100 years ago, finally at peace knowing that the promise would be fulfilled. "But there's one condition," she said softly. "What?" "You need to learn to trust other people. You can't do this alone. Mitchell, Claire, my mum, other families with special children, they will all be your partners in this mission." Thomas nodded, understanding that his transformation wasn't just about finding Emma again, but about opening himself to a completely new way of living and relating to the world. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with colors that Thomas could feel even without seeing, they walked back to the car. But something had fundamentally changed. Thomas was no longer the isolated and controlling man who had arrived at that beach. He was someone who had rediscovered his deepest purpose. "Emma," he said before starting the car, "thank you for coming back to find me." "Thank you for waiting for me," she replied. "Even without knowing you were waiting." During the journey back, Thomas drove with the same impossible confidence, but now his mind was buzzing with plans. He mentally calculated the resources needed to transform his vision into reality, thought about the people he would need to contact, the specialists he would need to hire. When they reached the city, they found Mitchell, Claire, and Rose waiting for them at the foundation, all visibly relieved to see them return. "Where have you been?" Rose asked, hugging Emma tightly. "Showing him what needs to be done," Emma replied calmly. Thomas addressed the group, his posture erect, but his countenance completely transformed. "I have a proposal to make to all of you, a proposal that will change not just our lives, but the lives of hundreds of special children who are yet to come." And as the sun set over Massachusetts, Thomas began to explain his vision of a future where children like Emma would be celebrated for their unique gifts, not marginalized for their differences. A future where the transcendental love that had reunited two souls separated by time would multiply into care and protection for countless other special souls. The promise made 100 years ago would finally be fulfilled, but in a much greater and more beautiful way than any of them could have imagined. 6 months later, Clear Horizon Foundation had become unrecognizable. Thomas walked through the new corridors with steps that echoed differently, no longer the calculated march of an impatient businessman, but the serene walk of someone who had found his true purpose. The walls, previously a hospital white, now displayed vibrant colors chosen by the children themselves. Colorful murals depicted various types of families, children with different abilities, and landscapes born from free imagination and total acceptance. "Mr. Thomas," a childish voice called him, and he turned with a genuine smile. "Hi, Jack, how was your session with Dr. Fernanda today?" The 9-year-old boy, who had arrived at the foundation with a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, ran to him carrying a drawing. "Look, I managed to draw my entire family without stopping even once." Thomas knelt to be at the boy's height, a gesture that had become natural in these months. "How wonderful! Tell me about each person in the drawing." As Jack excitedly described his creation, Thomas reflected on the silent revolution that had happened not only at the foundation, but in his own life. The center now had 15 professionals specialized in different therapeutic approaches, 3 psychologists with training in spirituality applied to mental health, and 2 educators specialized in children with differentiated abilities. Mitchell approached, carrying a folder with reports. "Thomas, the results of the first semester exceeded all our expectations. We have a waiting list of more than 200 families interested in our program." "And how are our first students?" "Transformed," Mitchell replied, his voice carrying genuine emotion. 23 children who arrived here labeled as problematic now demonstrate elevated self-esteem, exceptional creative development, and most importantly, full acceptance of their unique characteristics." Thomas nodded, lightly touching Jack's shoulder before standing. "And Claire, how's the family guidance program?" "Revolutionary," Mitchell smiled. "The workshops she develops with the parents have completely changed family dynamics. Yesterday, Gabriel's mother told me that, for the first time, she can see her son's differentiated episodes as manifestations of acute sensitivity, not as symptoms of illness." They walked together toward what was previously the main courtyard and had now become a therapeutic garden. Plants chosen for their calming properties grew alongside outdoor meditation spaces, free painting areas, and a small amphitheater where the children presented their artistic creations. In the center of the garden, under the apple tree that had witnessed the first encounter between Thomas and Emma, a bronze plaque bore a simple inscription, "In memory of Olivia Sanford Reed, 1910-1925, and in celebration of all special children who transform the world with their unique light." Thomas stopped before the plaque, as he did every day. It wasn't a ritual of mourning, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance to fulfill a promise, for the opportunity to transform ancestral pain into present healing. "Papa Thomas." Emma's sweet voice brought him back to the present moment. He turned in the direction of the voice, and his heart filled with the same peace he felt every time he heard her use that affectionate term. Officially, Thomas had become Emma's guardian 3 months ago, when Rose realized that the girl flourished extraordinarily under his care. He hadn't replaced the biological mother, but created an expanded family where everyone had unique and valuable roles. "Hi, little one. How was your morning with the new group?" Emma approached carrying her usual notebook, but now her drawings were different. Less fragmented, more integrated. They showed scenes of children playing together, happy families, hopeful futures. "The new little friends are still scared," she said, sitting on the bench next to the plaque. "They arrive thinking they're strange, that there's something wrong with them. And how do you help them?" "I show them that being different is being special, that each of us came with a unique gift to give to the world." Emma opened her notebook to a specific page. "Look at this drawing I made today." Thomas held the paper, and as always happened now, the images formed clearly in his mind. The drawing showed the foundation, but seen from above like a map. There were children spread throughout all corners, each shining with their own light. And these lights connected, forming a golden network that extended beyond the limits of the paper. "It's beautiful." "Emma, what do these golden connections mean?" "It's love spreading," she explained naturally. "Each child who learns to love their differences here takes that light to their family, to their school, to their friends. And those people pass it on to others and others." Thomas felt a shiver of recognition. It was exactly what he had visualized that afternoon on the beach, when he fully understood his mission. "And you, Emma? How do you feel now?" The girl closed her notebook and held his hand, a gesture that had become her natural form of deep communication. I feel complete. For the first time since I was born, I feel complete. Rose approached, carrying a tray with natural juices for the children. Her life had also been completely transformed. She now worked as a family support coordinator at the foundation, using her experience as the mother of a special child to help other families navigate their own journeys. Thomas, she said, offering him a glass of juice, yesterday I received a call from a mother from Portland. She heard about our work and wants to bring her 8-year-old son. According to her, the boy draws people who have departed from this world with impossible details. Schedule the evaluation for next week, Thomas replied immediately, and offer accommodation at the Partner Inn if they need to stay a few days to observe our program. Claire appeared running from the main building, her curly hair flying in the wind, carrying a sheet of paper. Thomas, Emma? Mitchell, come see this. They all gathered around her, curious. Remember Mariana, the 7-year-old girl who arrived last month completely withdrawn? Everyone nodded. Mariana had arrived at the foundation after a series of episodes at school where she claimed to converse with invisible friends, which had led teachers and parents to consider psychiatric hospitalization. She just gave me this drawing. Claire showed the paper with tears in her eyes. The drawing showed the foundation itself, but with a striking difference. In the place where there were once walls, now colorful bridges extended connecting the space to schools, hospitals, homes, parks. And on each bridge children walked happily, carrying their own special lights. She said she dreamed about this last night, Claire continued, and that she knew she needed to draw it to show how the world will be when all special children find their places. Thomas felt an overwhelming emotion take over his chest. It was as if he were seeing the future through that child's eyes, a future where differences were celebrated, where acute sensitivities were seen as gifts, not as problems. Mitchell approached him. Thomas, do you realize what we've created here? It's not just a therapeutic center. It's a movement, a new paradigm. And it's just the beginning, Thomas replied, his voice firm but emotional. We already have requests from 5 different cities to implement similar programs. In 2 years, we'll have a network of centers spread throughout the Northeast. Emma held his hand again, and Thomas felt the familiar presence of Olivia approach. It wasn't a melancholic sensation, but one of celebration, as if 2 souls were finally at peace, knowing that the promise had not only been fulfilled, but surpassed beyond all expectations. The sun began to set, painting the garden with golden tones that Thomas could feel even without seeing. The children naturally gathered in the amphitheater for the daily closing ritual, a moment where each one shared something special they had discovered about themselves that day. Today I discovered that my sensitivity isn't a defect, said Gabriel, the 10-year-old boy who was previously medicated for hyperactivity. I discovered that when I draw people who have passed away, I'm helping families to heal, shared Mariana, now speaking with confidence. And I discovered that I can teach other adults to understand children like us, said Emma, provoking proud smiles from all present. Thomas stood up as he did every day at this moment, and I discovered that the greatest wealth a man can accumulate isn't hotels or investments, it's the number of lives he can positively touch. As the children applauded and dispersed for dinner, Thomas remained in the garden with Emma. The tropical Massachusetts night settled around them, laden with possibilities and fulfilled promises. Papa Thomas, Emma said softly, Olivia is happy. She said you did much more than you promised. Thomas smiled, tears flowing freely down his face. And you, little one? Are you happy? I'm home, she answered simply. I'm finally home. And in that moment, under the stars that began to shine in the sky of Massachusetts, Thomas understood that he had found much more than he expected. Not only had he found a kindred soul, but he had discovered that true love has the power to transform not just 2 lives, but hundreds of them. Clear Horizon Foundation had become a beacon of hope for families throughout the Northeast.